I'll start with my hopes and then my fears. As far as my hopes go, first of all, I'm always optimistic about this kind of thing. I mean, I don't know. In my opinion, like, life is too short to be too worried about your, it's easy. You can convince yourself it's going to be horrible. Like, it's possible to be like, oh, it's going to be terrible. They're going to do awful things to it. It might be awful. Who knows? Right. But like, why worry about that? But before you have to, it might be awesome too. It might be really good. And here's the thing. I love that. So two things, the two things that they've done that I absolutely love, which are to me just wonderful, are first the decision to make it a long running serial thing, right? The biggest problem with the Peter Jackson adaptations is they're so short. Like, it shouldn't be feature films, right? Feature film is the wrong genre for that. You can't do justice to any book in a feature film.
20 years ago, that was the only place to get the budget.
Exactly, right.
You can't flesh out characters. You can't show character development. It's not
the equivalent. I mean, the feature film is the equivalent of the short story, not the equivalent of the book or the novel. I mean, it's not appropriate. And as you say, Dan, I mean, I'm not blaming Jackson. He had no choice back then. But so that was the first thing. The first thing that was my very, very first reaction was, finally, we're going to get an adaptation which has the opportunity to do more justice to the whole story. Because you can have I would, if I were, pitching it to somebody at the beginning, what I would have pitched was, give me at least one season per book, not per volume, per book. So 6 seasons from, the Long Expected Party to the Grey Havens, minimum. And ideally more. With that, oh man, you could do so much more with that. You'd still have to compress a lot, but you could do so much more. So I loved the fact that they were preparing to take their time and do the story in much longer form. Loved that. And then the information started to come out, with the map of Numenor and stuff like that. And it became clearer and clearer that not only were they committed to a form which would allow for a long-term story, but they were going to start the Lord of the Rings in the Second Age with the forging of the Rings of Power. And I'm like, that's doing it properly, right? That's starting the Lord of the Rings where it should be started, way back. Absolutely. Like, bring it on. Let's have the whole season. I hope season 1 doesn't end before the Battle of the Last Alliance at the earliest, That to me would be just gorgeous to have the kind of scale.
If I'm wrong, but the license is only for the Second Age, is it not? So they wouldn't.
We don't know. We don't know. We know for a fact that a new license was negotiated by Amazon. We do not know the content of that license. And this was one of the main sources of speculation, because many of the Numenorian elements in particular from the map, there are a number of things on that map that are only in Unfinished Tales, that are not in
and woods and
and that was strictly forbidden before. The Unfinished Tales has never been included in any of the licensing. It's only The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings exclusively. So we don't know. We have no idea what the license is. So now I do not think, and have no real suspicions, that the Silmarillion is included in the license.
No. Well, I mean, it can't even be the whole Unfinished Tales either, really, could it? Because
probably not.
There are Silmarillion elements in there, so you probably wouldn't be able to use those.
The way that the licenses have generally been articulated legally is that so for instance, you could say, well, hey, if you have the license for the Lord of the Rings, you can do Beren and Luthien, right? Because Beren and Luthien,
Aragorn
sings about it. Sam talks about it, right? So I mean, the names are there, the storyline is mentioned, right? So you can totally do Beren and Luthien if you've got the license to the Lord of the Rings. Legally, no. Actually, they can't. Because the way that the license is generally articulated is that if names or a story within the books come up, but the primary version of those names and stories is in an unlicensed text like the Silmarillion, and there's no question that the Silmarillion version of the Beren and Luthien story is the primary version, and the just like, so for instance, you can't have Orome as a character just because he's used in one simile. You know, when Theoden is compared to Orome the Great charging, right, when he's charging on Pelennor Field, that doesn't give you license to like use Orome as a character because he's primarily a Silmarillion character. So so therefore, I presume that even if they did have the license for Unfinished Tales, that would still apply. So you couldn't use the Turin Turambar material from Unfinished Tales because the Silmarillion is still the primary place where the Turin story is told, and you don't have the license for that. But it would give you the license. You could easily argue that the Numenor stuff. You know, that like, especially like the chapters on Numenor is even more like, especially for the map material, for the names and things, that is it's the only place it exists. It's not even in the Akalabath. Yeah. So anyway, so I don't know. I don't know what's in I have no inside information about this. I'm not, you know, don't anybody quote me as saying I've got inside information. I'm just saying how the license has worked and that there has been speculation wondering whether or not they might have Unfinished Tales. Anyway, so these are the things that give me hope. These are the things that I really love. I love the scope of the project. I love their approach to it. You know, the way that they're going back to the old versions of the stories and stuff. And also,
Alan Lee and John Howe being involved, I think, is really, really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as far as I know, they're still involved.
Yes. So no, I think that's and they're clearly taking it seriously. I mean, that there's a real investment in. I mean, even just like from a financial level. I mean, Amazon has invested unbelievable amounts of money in this production. So you got to think that they're gonna, you know, they're in several ways of thinking they're going to do it properly. It's not going to be just a sort of a slapdash production. So that's great. Excellent. Very exciting. Of course, there's been the recent controversy that has been sort of swirling around it about, you know, stories of nudity and, you know, stuff. I'm
sure it won't be brothels of Middle Earth. I mean, come on. It's not.
I don't think so. No. So when I think about it, right, you know, a lot of people have, you know, asked me about this, right? And they've been like, okay, what do you think they're doing? I was having a conversation about this with my nephew, who's 20, and he was like, what do you think? Seriously, what is the deal with that? Why, you know, how are they going to bring nudity into a Lord of the Rings adaptation? And I'm like, look, I don't think it's going to be like, you know, scene at the Prancing Pony, except this time with topless dancers. Like, I don't think they're going to do that. I've seen nothing.
There's no way that will focus test well ever.
No, nothing in their, nothing in any of the materials that they have released have suggested that they're going to have that kind of a disregard for the spirit of the story. So when I think about it, okay, if I take for granted the fact, and first of all, who knows what's actually going to happen? You know, I mean, like there's some evidence that they're really seriously thinking about this, but we have no idea what it is or what it means, you know, exactly. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of speculation based on the fact that people keep comparing it to Game of Thrones. But in my mind, that's a really sloppy comparison. And to say, people say, well, Jeff Bezos is famously quoted as saying, you know, give me the next Game of Thrones. What does that mean? That could mean so many. It doesn't necessarily mean give me lots of topless women. Like, that's not the same. There's so much more to it than that, right?
Saga, and he won.
Yes. That kind of seriousness and that kind of scope and that kind of detail and you know. So I do not think and honestly, in
topless women.
Seriously, it's like there's so much more to it than that. And honestly, the nudity in Game of Thrones, I felt was so much of the time a blemish. I mean, there's so many places where it's like, and now, you know, the topless scene in this episode, and it was I found it quite tiresome often in Game of Thrones itself.
The funny thing is, we as Europeans, you know, well, I mean, Dan is English, but you know, I'm German. I grew up near the French border. Like, for us, it was like a casual day. I know you Americans are different about this, but
we're different about this.
We're like, what's the this is not even anything not normal.
Yeah, and it was yeah.
So we Europeans are, when we had this discussion, we're like, huh? I don't get it.
Well, it is. You're right that it is definitely different in America. But anyway, so when I ask myself, all right, so let's assume they are, going to have, nude scenes. What are they going to do? Like, what's that going to look like? What's that going to mean for the adaptation? I don't know. I mean, the one thing that strikes me that I could imagine them trying to do, because like I said, I don't imagine they're just going to be trying to insert nudity in random spots in the story. Like, I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't think they'll be doing sex position.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But what I could imagine is, especially if they're going to depict Numenor, I can imagine them saying, we want to depict like an extravagant and decadent society in Numenor.
And yes, when Sauron comes, like like Babylon.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Showing the the wicked and decadent Numenor before its fall. Yeah. And can I imagine them having scenes that have orgies in the background, or maybe even human sacrifices, right? The human sacrifices on the altars of Sauron, stripped naked and sacrificed or something. Yeah. Yes, I can imagine them doing something like that. Do I think that would be the end of the world? I don't think that would be the end of the world. I don't feel like, in my mind, it's not like a necessarily a huge, but the one thing that I would say, I do think it would be a big deal. The thing about the Game of Thrones sexual content, right? They did a lot, and here, to give them credit, they were being true to the spirit of George R.R. Martin's books, because George R.R. Martin's books also have a lot of that same sexual content, and both the books and the show there was to use a very old-fashioned word, a prurient edge to it, right? Part of the drive was that like sexual enticement, right? That the reader is drawn in you can feel that the books want to have that effect. They're trying to titillate you in those ways. That element, that dynamic within a story, I don't know a single work of literature where that element is more utterly and completely absent than The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings are the least sexually prurient. I mean, it's not to say that there's nobody has sex in Middle-earth. Like, that's not true, right? It's not even to say that there aren't any like sexual subplots, because there is sexual desire.
Look at the crossbreeding of the orcs. That's
goodness.
About,
in off-screen,
reproduction, isn't it?
Yeah, there's horrifying sexual content that's unstated in that way.
It's just imagined, but it's
right. But even the when there is, Faramir clearly is sexually attracted to Éowyn, right? That's there, right? But yet Tolkien never plays on that, right? There's never a scene anywhere in Tolkien's published works in his lifetime where he invites, even indirectly, the reader to experience a vicarious sexual thrill with any of his stories.
But you never miss it. That's the
point.
point.
You never miss it.
You never say, oh my God, this would have been the perfect story if...
Right.
No,
exactly.
It's just, I never thought about it before these people came out with it. Yes. I was like, oh yeah, you're right.
It's alien. That's the kind of worst case scenario, right? The worst case scenario with the whole nudity sexual dynamic there, as has been rumored in the Amazon film. If they go that direction, if they introduce that kind of sexual titillation as an element of the story, that I think would be a serious mistake, because there is nothing that will feel less true to the spirit of Tolkien. There's nothing that will feel more alien to the Lord of the Rings world than that. And I give Peter Jackson massive credit about this.
He made
he did that. He had so many opportunities, right? Even he cast beautiful women, right?
Yeah.
You know, he cast beautiful women as Galadriel and Arwen and Toriel, even Toriel, who gets shoehorned into a hugely awkward love triangle. And yet, think about, you know, although Evangeline Lilly was compelled to try to utter some of the worst lines of dialogue ever composed for an actress, she was never asked to wear like skin tight leather. You know, she was never made a sexual object. She never was. Her body's not sexualized. Arwen is never sexualized. Éowyn is never sexualized. I mean, how easy would it have been? How easy would it have been when Arwen is on the battlefield, right? To, you know, have her in some kind of skimpy outfit that looks like something out of like a Dungeons and Dragons illustration, you know, or like a Conan the Barbarian cover or something like that, right? I mean, she could easily have been in this, like, you know, iron brassiere, bare midriff Viking.
Chainmail bikini.
Chainmail bikini.
Wonder Woman Amazonians, you know, how they're portrayed. Exactly.
I mean, it would have been so easy, and he might even have gotten a pass for it, you know, because it's so normal in I mean, in fact, the way that he refused to do that was countercultural, very countercultural in the film world, right, where he was releasing that. So I give him, so like Peter Jackson got it. Like they realized this, that you can have, you know, beautiful people, right? And there were beautiful people, you know, the beautiful men and women, plenty of beautiful men and women, both in the Lord of the Rings films. And and yet that dynamic was never there. There was never, you know, you were never drawn into sex, you know, experiencing as a viewer sexual desire. For it was just, it's not part of the story. So that's my primary. I won't say it's even a fear of mine, because I have no idea what they're going to do, and it may be fine. But that's my hope, that if they do this, even if they do have nudity, if they resist that, it won't be the end of the world. Yeah. But anyway, so as far as hopes and fears, you know, that's primarily what I got. But I'm primarily looking forward to it. I am excited to see. At the very least, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Exactly.
You know,
it doesn't need to become canon in my head. You know, it's more about I want to what I imagine Numenor, or that the end, like the last days of Numenor. I want to see that, and not just, there's beautiful fan art out there. Like, oh my god, these seriously, these artists are amazing. I always use them for my videos, but I want to see it on film.
Agreed. No, it's great. And this is what I always tell people, you know, there are a lot of people who as I say, who worry, right? Who are afraid about it, and are saying, like, oh, I'm so afraid that, like, they're going to ruin it. I'm like, look, they can't. It's not possible. They can't ruin Tolkien. You will always have Tolkien, right? It's fine. Like the fact that the Bakshi Fellowship of the Ring film from 1978, I think it was, you know, depicted Aragorn without pants and Boromir in a Viking helmet with no pants, right? Like, and the Balrog with like fuzzy boots and butterfly wings, like, you know, that didn't ruin it. Like, it didn't ruin it. Like, the story is still the same. I'm
scared of that movie. I saw that as a kid. I'm still scared.
It is kind of scary, actually. And even like Sam's nose scares me to this day. Sam is the biggest nose I've ever seen in that film. Actually, that's the one part of the film that really upsets me, is that they depict Sam as if he were an idiot, which I really dislike. But anyway, the point is, they're not going to ruin it. They can't ruin it. And you can always just not watch it. And
what I think, it will bring more people to the books, and that's a beautiful thing, because people want to know, oh my God, what are they talking about?
Yes.
And that is a good thing.
Absolutely.
And everybody should be happy about that their father's work, you know, comes back in a way.
It is fun to be a Tolkien scholar of my age, because I was in graduate school when the first Tolkien movie came out, right? So that meant when I started teaching, like when I began my career as a professor, I was teaching to like the first generation of movie watchers, right, who discovered Tolkien through the movies. So I saw firsthand that first wave of people who discovered Tolkien for the first time that way. And now, I've been around long enough that I know many Tolkien scholars who themselves discovered, who like those people who went on to become Tolkien scholars, and who who have their roots back in watching the film when they were in high school or whatever. And so like watching that happen. So I mean, I've seen that. So yes, not only did many people discover the books by watching the films, but many of the people who did discover the books by watching the films have gone on now greatly to enrich the world of Tolkien studies and to go on to teach generations of more students Tolkien, right? So to see that begin up again would be awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that there isn't a kind of like stigma attached to scholars who did get into Tolkien that way, actually.
I don't think so. I mean, there's you will still hear. I mean, I haven't heard this argument in a long time.
Still some elitists out
there. There are. There are definitely elitists out there, and you will still occasionally meet somebody who will say, "I don't think the study of Tolkien was ever enhanced at all by the films," which is just a silly thing to say. I mean, it's an absolutely silly thing to say. I was talking just, I don't know, maybe a year ago online with somebody who was like insisting that like, nobody, like there never was a serious reader of Tolkien who discovered it through the films. And I'm like, how can you even maintain that? Like, I mean, I know off the top of my head, dozens of people who are like that. So it's like, whatever. It's just, a kind of isolationist elitism, basically.
Ivory tower mentality.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I'm definitely excited to see that. It will be a fun new round of conversations to have.